why measurement? This video I want to discuss from the financial point of view why measurement is important. And in fact, a lot of the measurement that has been done in the ESG space, E for environment, S for social, G for governance, has been motivated by financial objectives. So I want to discuss this from the financial point of view. So why firms should care about measurement beyond promise. Okay, this is about actually flows and income and revenues. So again, let me summarize what promise is. It's an acronym that highlights all the dimensions of sustainability. P for personal, R for relationships, O for organizations, M for markets, I institutions, S for social and political, and E for the environment. As we said in previous videos, the quality of measurement that exists varies with the dimension. It is the case that we are much better at measuring economic outcomes than we are about personal and environmental outcomes. And in general, what that occurs is that because the measurement is what leads to incentives and punishments in the society, what happens is that we tend to pay a lot of attention to economic outcomes and very little attention to personal and environmental. And by the way, kind of our attention, our actions tend to move like the measurement quality. A lot of the actions that we take in real life are all concentrated on economic outcomes or the pursuit of economic outcomes, and we tend to disregard a lot of our actions on the extremes. Okay, so something that I also said before, and is worth repeating, is that there's a very big difference between motivation and incentives. Motivation is coming from our values, how important these different dimensions are for us, and incentives come from the measurement and the quality of measurement. And I have said in the previous video, we need incentives when we are not motivated, and I don't need incentives when I'm motivated. So I always think about this as two extreme cases. So now, why should firms care about measurement in general? So I want to talk about something that in economics is very usual to discuss, but that in practice is a concept that, even though I think that everybody knows them, in practice is not used enough. And this is the difference between private returns and social returns. It is the case that when I take an action, I enjoy part of the benefits of that action, but that action can hurt others, which means that I produce a cost on others, or I produce a benefit on others, and therefore I benefit others. So for example, you can think about traffic as something that when I get into traffic, I am slowing down everybody else. So that action that I took now is hurting other people that are in the highway. By the way, some of these cost is private, because when I go to the highway and the highway is congested, I am paying part of that cost, but I'm also increasing the cost on everybody else. So some of these are private, some of them are public. Environment is the easiest of all. When I pollute, I don't bear the cost of my pollution, but the garbage that I create. There are benefits as well. When I do, for example, research and development, I can improve knowledge on others, and I might not benefit from that. I have a good idea, and then somebody else can copy that idea because it's not protected by patents, or it's not protected well enough by patents. So that produces a benefit on others that I can accrue. But right now, we have the wearing of masks is a tremendous difference between social and private benefits. The reason why we wear masks is that it protects me a little bit, but truly it's protecting others from me. That's the true protection. But I don't get any benefit from what other people do. And as you can imagine, a society will like to make a different decision than individuals. If my actions hurt others, the society will like me to do less of that. They will say, you know what, you're hurting others, so don't do it. Please stop, because you're hurting other people. On the other side, if I do something that benefits others, I do too little. The society would like me to do more of that. So it is common that there's a discrepancy between what the society wants to do and what individuals want to do. And that the society might choose different levels of activity than what individuals will choose. So I want to talk a little bit about this because there's also the difference between the short run and the long run. Social costs are more visible in the long run. Private benefits tend to be more visible in the short run. Okay, so I want to actually highlight that. Let me assume that a firm is doing something unethical. Where unethical means that it's either hurting their workers or is doing something that hurts a community, and building a dam that is unsafe or producing products that are unsafe to the customers, or they are polluting the environment, etc. They are doing something unethical. They can make several choices. One is to continue their behavior, and what I have drawn here is their continuation of their behavior. So I'm going to assume that when you continue that behavior, there are profits that you will be making in the short run until that unethical behavior backfires. So if I treat women very badly, at some point in time, this will be known through the years. It will be known, and therefore, women will decide not to work in my company, and therefore, I will get a very big negative return when that happens. Why? Because it will be harder for me to get skilled workers, for example. Or if I'm polluting, then somebody will have a regulation and they will hurt me by a regulation or a fine, for example. If I was abusing workers in Bangladesh, well, then there will be repercussions on my brand, and the value of my brand will go down. So the idea is that in the future, either regulation or retaliation might happen if I continue. This is so uncertain, and the key here is the uncertainty. This is so uncertain, and I don't know the size and I don't know when it's going to happen, that most organizations tend to disregard it. And therefore they continue their everyday job. Again, it's related to measurement. If we measure the consequences of that regulation incorrectly or with high degree of uncertainty, people will just not take actions to avoid that regulatory or retaliation in the future, regulatory fine. I could do something else. I could change my behavior today. And to change my behavior today, let's assume I need to do an investment to reform what I do. Now, immediately I will have some benefits, and I call that bragging rights, because truly there will be some short-run returns about me highlighting that I'm doing something good for humankind. Okay, so it's good to have those bragging rights. The issue is that every action that I take that will be good for the environment, or good for income inequality, or good for the political system, or good for the personal life of my workers, we have some private benefits, that's for sure. Some of them I will be able to enjoy. If I treat people nicely, then better workers will apply for the jobs when I put vacancies. But the true benefit is actually to the society. And that's a much harder to measure, and it's much harder to take advantage. In fact, the way I have done is to assume that I cannot enjoy the benefits that I produce on others. So therefore, because I cannot enjoy the benefits to the society directly to me, I tend to do very little of these investments. That's kind of the message. Let me talk a little bit about the way I think about it when I have this ethical view of ESG. In a second, I will return to this. When we do investments, I think that there's some examples where we get private benefits in the future, plus the bragging rights, that are big enough that this is positive. But I think that actually there are very few of those. Most of the time I think that actually this is negative. And hence, that's why it's not happening. Now, when I take the same aspect and I add the intangibles, things that will benefit, but they are difficult for me to measure. They are not in the profits. They are on the reputation of the firm, for example. They are on the trust of the relationships, the impact that I cause on others, things that make my actions consistent with the missions of my firm, etc. that consistency. These are intangibles that are important, that will benefit my brand, but they are very difficult to appropriate in some sense, enjoy. Some of them will become private. Most of them are intangibles, and they are difficult to measure. They are difficult to understand the connection between the investment today and that intangible. That's for sure. That connection is extremely hard to understand. So even if you know that you can take advantage, the connection will be hard to actually envision. But then there's ones that are, you just will not be able to take advantage. Things like the externalities that you produce directly or indirectly, the social impact on communities. You will not be able to charge communities because of your good behavior. That's it's unthinkable. The impact that I will have on my competitors, that's a very important one, and in fact is extremely important one, because leaders of industry can have a very big impact on all the other competitors in the industry. If someone like BlackRock that decides to do something regarding their form of investments, they will impact the whole financial industry. If JP Morgan decides to do something, it will impact the whole industry. And very importantly, there's one that is not highlighted enough, which is how much that impact on the industry will shift the political discussion. These are things that you cannot appropriate. Very difficult to actually have revenues, things that we tend to measure in organizations, or profits to the stakeholders. Very difficult to measure. And in fact, actually, I don't think, even if you were to measure it, you will not be able to appropriate. So your stakeholders will not enjoy the benefits of that. Now, one thing that I know is that most of those actions will have a positive effect. When we add all the impact that we have, private, intangible, and social, I think that most of these actions that we want people to pursue will be positive. They will be worth doing. The issue is that when you look at this only privately, they may not. And there are many that they may not. People like to emphasize the one that they're having positive. I understand that, because life sounds better that way. I actually think that it's not realistic. So what are we currently measuring in terms of ESG? ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And the purpose of that is to measure what is the likelihood that a firm is behaving properly in each of these dimensions. The way we measure that is looking at different data sources. One are about news in the newspaper and scandals, accidents, things like that. So we look at several outcomes that occurs in firms. We look at, for example, statements that come from firms. We look at procedures that firms have to try to avoid those accidents. So we have very different measures about how we think the firm is behaving in any particular dimension. There are many categories. SASB is a standard that exists that has about 24 to 27 categories for each industry. These are things like CO2 emissions, but water usage, waste, treatment of workers, things like how you make decisions, things about women empowerment, how many women do you have in top management, etc. So this industry is very broad in terms of the measures that they have and the categories that they have, and they have many different data sources. So right now we have more than 200 data providers, and by the way, there are more and more coming in the pipeline. And one of the things that I want to discuss next is how good are those measurements. The way this started in a very simple way that that has become more and more complicated as time has gone along. The very beginning, there was an advice to investors: don't invest in seen sectors that we believe produce harm to people. The lottery, cigarettes, guns. Just don't invest in those. So that was a very simple advice when you think about it. And then there was also the advice on CO2 emissions. So if you are an oil company, just don't invest in an oil company. Things became more complicated the day we started to think about the supply chain to these industries and these organizations. When I have a steel mill that sells, 90% of their production to a gun manufacturer, Is that a steel company or is that a gun manufacturer? It's complicated, no? By the way, if the number is 90, I would probably classify that firm as, a gun producer. But what about 30? What is the number? How do we know? And that's when ESG's data providers started to realize that there was a problem with this simplistic approach about scene sectors. And then they started to try to provide some guidance to people. And I think the motivation was very good. Things got even more complicated when we started to think about aspects of labor treatment and how decisions are made. What is a scene and how can you detect the scene? So things were significantly more complicated and afterwards. And that explains the proliferation that we have on measurements right now. We need to think about the quality of that measurement, because if that quality of measurement is not good, then firms are not going to be making proper decisions, regardless if they are positive or not at the private benefit. So I care about the society, so I want to look at social returns. So if you get private returns, that's fine with me. I want to look at social returns. That's kind of my goal in life. So I need to think about, well, if we don't measure properly, how do I know what the social returns are going to be? In fact, what are the corrective actions I have to take if I have no clue what's happening? So what I want to do is to discuss the quality of measurement and have these two frameworks in mind. Promise, which is about values, but also finance, about revenues and private and social returns. See you in the next video.